This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jeremy Pavier. The Black Arrow, A Tale of the Two Roses, by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 2, Chapter 4, The Passage. The passage in which Dick and Joanna now found themselves was narrow, dirty, and short. At the other end of it, a door stood partly open, the same door, without doubt, that they had heard the man unlocking. Heavy cobwebs hung from the roof, and the paved flooring echoed hollow under the lightest tread. Beyond the door there were two branches, at right angles. Dick chose one of them at random, and the pair hurried with echoing footsteps along the hollow of the chapel roof. The top of the arched ceiling rose like a whale's back in the dim glimmer of the lamp. Here and there were spy-holes, concealed on the other side by the carving of the cornice. And looking down through one of these, Dick saw the paved floor of the chapel, the altar with its burning tapers, and stretched before it on the steps, the figure of Sir Oliver praying with uplifted hands. At the other end they descended a few steps. The passage grew narrower. The wall upon one hand was now of wood. The noise of people talking and a faint flickering of lights came through the interstices, and presently they came to a round hole about the size of a man's eye, and Dick, looking down through it, beheld the interior of the hall, and some half a dozen men sitting in their jacks about the table, drinking deep and demolishing a venison pie. These were certainly some of the late arrivals. "Here is no help," said Dick. "Let us try back." "Nay," said Joanna, "maybe the passage goeth farther." And she pushed on. But a few yards farther the passage ended at the top of a short flight of steps, and it became plain that, as long as the soldiers occupied the hall, escape was impossible upon that side. They retraced their steps with all imaginable speed, and set forward to explore the other branch. It was exceedingly narrow, scarce wide enough for a large man, and it led them continually up and down by little breakneck stairs, until even Dick had lost all notion of his whereabouts. At length it grew both narrower and lower. The stairs continued to descend, the walls on either hand became damp and slimy to the touch, and far in front of them they heard the squeaking and scuttling of the rats. "We must be in the dungeons," Dick remarked. "And still there is no outlet," added Joanna. "Nay, but an outlet there must be," Dick answered. Presently, sure enough, they came to a sharp angle, and then the passage ended in a flight of steps. On the top of that there was a solid flag of stone by way of trap, and to this they both set their backs. It was immovable. "Some one holdeth it?" suggested Joanna. "Not so," said Dick. "For were a man as strong as 10, he must still yield a little. But this resisteth like dead rock. There is a weight upon the trap. Here is no issue. And by my sooth, good Jack, we are here as fairly prisoners as though the gyves were on our ankle bones. Sit ye then down, and let us talk. After a while we shall return, when perchance they shall be less carefully upon their guard. And who knoweth, we may break out and stand a chance. But, in my poor opinion, we are as good as shent." "Dick," she cried, "alas the day that ever ye should have seen me! For, like a most unhappy and unthankful maid, it is I have led you hither." "What cheer?" returned Dick. "It was all written, and that which is written willy nilly cometh still to pass. But tell me a little what manner of a maid ye are, and how ye came into Sir Daniel's hands. That will do better than to bemoan yourself, whether for your sake or mine." "I am an orphan like yourself of father and mother," said Joanna. "And for my great misfortune, Dick, and hitherto for yours, I am a rich marriage. My Lord Foxham had me to ward, yet it appears Sir Daniel bought the marriage of me from the king, and a right dear price he paid for it. So here was I, poor babe, with two great and rich men fighting which should marry me, and I still at nurse. Well, then the world changed, and there was a new chancellor, and Sir Daniel bought the warding of me over the Lord Foxham's head. And then the world changed again, and Lord Foxham bought my marriage over Sir Daniel's. And from then to now it went on ill betwixt the two of them. But still Lord Foxham kept me in his hands, and was a good lord to me. And at last I was to be married, or sold, if ye like it better. £500 Lord Foxham was to get for me. Hamley was the groom's name, and to-morrow, Dick, of all days in the year, was I to be betrothed. Had it not come to Sir Daniel, I had been wedded sure. and never seen thee, Dick, dear Dick." And here she took his hand and kissed it with the prettiest grace. And Dick drew her hand to him and did the like. "Well," she went on, "Sir Daniel took me unawares in the garden, and made me dress in these men's clothes, which is a deadly sin for a woman, and besides they fit me not. He rode with me to Ketley, as ye saw, telling me I was to marry you, but I, in my heart, made sure I would marry Hamley in his teeth." "Ay," cried Dick, "and so ye love this Hamley?" "Nay," replied Joanna, "not I. I did but hate Sir Daniel." "And then, Dick, ye helped me, and ye were right kind and very bold, and my heart turned towards you in mine own despite. And now, if we can in any way compass it, I would marry you with right good will. And if, by cruel destiny, it may not be, still you'll be dear to me. While my heart beats, it'll be true to you." "And I," said Dick, "that never cared a straw for any manner of woman until now, I took to you when I thought you were a boy. I had a pity to you, and knew not why. When I would have belted you, the hand failed me. But when ye owned you were a maid, Jack, for still I will call you Jack, I made sure you were the maid for me. Hark!" he said, breaking off. "One cometh." And indeed a heavy tread was now audible in the echoing passage, and the rats again fled in armies. Dick reconnoitred his position. The sudden turn gave him a post of vantage. He could thus shoot in safety from the cover of the wall. But it was plain the light was too near him, and running some way forward, he set down the lamp in the middle of the passage, and then returned to watch. Presently, at the far end of the passage, Bennet hove in sight. He seemed to be alone, and he carried in his hand a burning torch, which made him the better mark. "Stand, Bennet," cried Dick. "Another step, and you're dead." "So here ye are," returned Hatch, peering forward into the darkness. "I see you not. Aha! Y' have done wisely, Dick. Y' have put your lamp before you. By my sooth, but though it was done to shoot my own knave body, I do rejoice to see ye profit of my lessons. And now what make ye? What seek ye here? Why would ye shoot upon an old kind friend? And have ye the young gentlewoman there?" "Nay, Bennet, it is I should question, and you answer," replied Dick. "Why am I in this jeopardy of my life? Why do men come privily to slay me in my bed? Why am I now fleeing in mine own guardian's strong house, and from the friends that I have lived among and never injured?" Master Dick," said Bennet, "what told I you? Ye're brave, but the most uncrafty lad that I can think upon." "Well," returned Dick, "I see ye know all, and that I am doomed indeed. 'Tis well. Here, where I am, I stay. Let Sir Daniel get me out if he be able." Hatch was silent for a space. "Hark ye," he began, "return to Sir Daniel, to tell him where ye are, and how posted. For in truth, it was to that end he sent me. But you, if ye are no fool, had best be gone ere I return." "Begone!" repeated Dick. "I would be gone already, and I wist how. I cannot move the trap." "Put me your hand into the corner, and see what ye find there," replied Bennet. "Throgmorton's rope is still in the brown chamber. Fare ye well." And Hatch, turning upon his heel, disappeared again into the windings of the passage. Dick instantly returned for his lamp, and proceeded to act upon the hint. At one corner of the trap there was a deep cavity in the wall. Pushing his arm into the aperture, Dick found an iron bar, which he thrust vigorously upwards. There followed a snapping noise, and the slab of stone instantly started in its bed. They were free of the passage. A little exercise of strength easily raised the trap, and they came forth into a vaulted chamber, opening on one hand upon the court, where one or two fellows with bare arms were rubbing down the horses of the last arrivals. A torch or two, each stuck in an iron ring against the wall, changefully lit up the scene. End of Book 2, Chapter 4. Recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jeremy Pavier. The Black Arrow, A Tale of the Two Roses by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 2, Chapter 5. How Dick Changed Sides. Dick, blowing out his lamp lest it should attract attention, led the way upstairs and along the corridor. In the brown chamber the rope had been made fast to the frame of an exceeding heavy and ancient bed. It had not been detached, and Dick, taking the coil to the window, began to lower it slowly and cautiously into the darkness of the night. John stood by, but as the rope lengthened, and still Dick continued to pay it out, extreme fear began to conquer her resolution. "Dick," she said, "is it so deep? I may not essay it. I should infallibly fall, good Dick." It was just at the delicate moment of the operations that she spoke. Dick started. The remainder of the coil slipped from his grasp, and the end fell with a splash into the moat. Instantly, from the battlement above, the voice of a sentinel cried, "Who goes?" "Amarain," cried Dick. "We are paid now. Down with you! Take the rope!" "I cannot," she cried, recoiling. "And ye cannot, no more can I," said Shelton. "How can I swim the moat without you? Do you desert me, then?" "Dick," she gasped, "I cannot. The strength is gone from me." "By their mass, then, we are all shent!" he shouted, stamping with his foot; and then, hearing steps, he ran to the room door and sought to close it. Before he could shoot the bolt, strong arms were thrusting it back upon him from the other side. He struggled for a second, then, feeling himself overpowered, ran back to the window. The girl had fallen against the wall in the embrasure of the window. She was more than half insensible, and when he tried to raise her in his arms, her body was limp and unresponsive. At the same moment, the men who had forced the door against him laid hold upon him. The first he poignarded at a blow, and the others falling back for a second in some disorder, he profited by the chance, bestrode the window-sill, seized the cord in both hands, and let his body slip. The cord was knotted, which made it the easier to descend. But so furious was Dick's hurry, and so small his experience of such gymnastics, that he span round and round in mid-air, like a criminal upon a gibbet, and now beat his head, and now bruised his hands against the rugged stonework of the wall. The air roared in his ears. He saw the stars overhead, and the reflected stars below him in the moat, whirling like dead leaves before the tempest. And then he lost hold, and fell, and soused head over ears into the icy water. When he came to the surface, his hand encountered the rope, which, newly lightened of his weight, was swinging wildly to and fro. There was a red glow overhead, and looking up, he saw, by the light of several torches and a cresset full of burning coals, the battlements lined with faces. He saw the men's eyes turning hither and thither in quest of him, but he was too far below. The light reached him not, and they looked in vain. And now he perceived that the rope was considerably too long, and he began to struggle as well as he could towards the other side of the moat, still keeping his head above the water. In this way he got much more than half-way over. Indeed, the bank was almost within reach before the rope began to draw him back by his own weight. Taking his courage in both hands, he left go and made a leap for the trailing sprays of willow that had already, that same evening, helped Sir Daniel's messenger to land. He went down, rose again, sank a second time, and then his hand caught a branch, and with the speed of thought he had dragged himself into the thick of the tree, and clung there, dripping and panting, and still half uncertain of his escape. But all this had not been done without a considerable splashing, which had so far indicated his position to the men along the battlements. Arrows and quarrels fell thick around him in the darkness, thick like driving hail, and suddenly a torch was thrown down, flared through the air in its swift passage, stuck for a moment on the edge of the bank, where it burned high, and lit up its whole surroundings like a bonfire, and then, in a good hour for Dick, slipped off, plumped into the moat, and was instantly extinguished. It had served its purpose. The marksman had had time to see the willow, and Dick ensconced among its boughs, and though the lad instantly sprang higher up the bank and ran for his life, he was yet not quick enough to escape a shot. An arrow struck him in the shoulder, another grazed his head. The pain of his wounds lent him wings, and he had no sooner got upon the level than he took to his heels and ran straight before him in the dark, without a thought for the direction of his flight. For a few steps missiles followed him, but these soon eased, and when at length he came to a halt and looked behind, he was already a good way from the moat house, though he could still see the torches moving to and fro along its battlements. He leaned against a tree, streaming with blood and water, bruised, wounded, alone, and unarmed. For all that, he had saved his life for that bout. and though Joanna remained behind in the power of Sir Daniel, he neither blamed himself for an accident that it would have been beyond his power to prevent, nor did he augur any fatal consequences to the girl herself. Sir Daniel was cruel, but he was not likely to be cruel to a young gentlewoman who had other protectors, willing and able to bring him to account. It was more probable he would make haste to marry her to some friend of his own. Well, thought Dick, between then and now I will find me the means to bring that traitor under, for I think, by the mass, that I now be absolved from any gratitude or obligation, and when war is open, there is a fair chance for all. In the meanwhile, here he was in a sore plight. For some little way farther he struggled forward through the forest. But what with the pain of his wounds, the darkness of the night, and the extreme uneasiness and confusion of his mind, he soon became equally unable to guide himself or to continue to push through the close undergrowth, and he was fain at length to sit down and lean his back against a tree. When he awoke from something betwixt sleep and swooning, the grey of the morning had begun to take the place of night. A little chilly breeze was bustling among the trees, and as he still sat staring before him, only half awake, he became aware of something dark that swung to and fro among the branches some 100 yards in front of him. The progressive brightening of the day and the return of his own senses at last enabled him to recognise the object. It was a man hanging from the bough of a tall oak. His head had fallen forward on his breast, but at every stronger puff of wind his body span round and round, and his legs and arms tossed like some ridiculous plaything. Dick clambered to his feet, and staggering and leaning on the tree trunks as he went, drew nearer to this grim object. The bough was perhaps 20 feet above the ground, and the poor fellow had been drawn up so high by his executioners that his boots swung clear above Dick's reach, and as his hood had been drawn over his face, it was impossible to recognise the man. Dick looked about him right and left, and at last he perceived that the other end of the cord had been made fast to the trunk of a little hawthorn which grew thick with blossom under the lofty arcade of the oak. With his dagger, which alone remained to him of all his arms, young Shelton severed the rope, and instantly, with a dead thump, the corpse fell in a heap upon the ground. Dick raised the hood. It was Throgmorton, Sir Daniel's messenger. He had not gone far upon his errand. A paper, which had apparently escaped the notice of the men of the Black Arrow, stuck from the bosom of his doublet, and Dick, pulling it forth, found it was Sir Daniel's letter to Lord Wensleydale. Come, thought he, if the world changes yet again, I may have here the wherewithal to shame Sir Daniel, nay, and perchance to bring him to the block. And he put the paper in his own bosom, said a prayer over the dead man, and set forth again through the woods. His fatigue and weakness increased, his ears sang, his steps faltered, his mind at intervals failed him. So low had he been brought by loss of blood. Doubtless he made many deviations from his true path, but at last he came out upon the high road, not very far from Tunstall hamlet. A rough voice bid him stand. "Stand!" repeated Dick. "By the mass, but I am nearer falling." And he suited the action to the word, and fell all his length upon the road. 2 men came forth out of the thicket, each in green forest jerkin, each with longbow and quiver and short sword. "Why, Lawless," said the younger of the two, "it is young Shelton." "Ay, this will be as good as bread to John Amend All," returned the other. "Though, faith, he hath been to the wars. Here is a tear in his scalp that must have cost him many a good ounce of blood. And here," added Greensheve, "is a hole in his shoulder that must have pricked him well. Who hath done this, think ye? If it be one of ours, he may alter prayer. Ellis will give him short shrift and a long rope." "Up with the cub," said Lawless. "Clap him on my back." And then, when Dick had been hoisted to his shoulders, and he had taken the lad's arms about his neck, and got a firm hold of him, the ex-Grey Friar added, "Keep you the post, brother Greensheve. I will on with him myself." So Greensheve returned to his ambush on the wayside, and Lawless trudged down the hill, whistling as he went, with Dick, still in a dead faint, comfortably settled on his shoulders. The sun rose as he came out of the skirts of the wood and saw Tunstall hamlet straggling up the opposite hill. All seemed quiet, but a strong post of some half a score of archers lay close by the bridge on either side of the road, and as soon as they perceived Lawless with his burthen, began to bestir themselves and set arrow to string like vigilant sentries. "Who goes?" cried the man in command. "Will Lawless, by the rood. You know me as well as your own hand," returned the outlaw, contemptuously. "Give the word, Lawless," returned the other. "Now, heaven lighten thee, thou great fool," replied Lawless. "Did I not tell it thee myself? But ye are all mad for this playing at soldiers. When I am in the greenwood, give me the greenwood ways. And my word for this tide is, a fig for all mock soldiery. Lawless, ye but show an ill example. Give us the word, fool jester," said the commander of the post. "And if I had forgotten it?" asked the other. "An ye had forgotten it, as I know ye have not, by the mass, I would clap an arrow into your big body," returned the first. "Nay, and ye are so ill a jester," said Lawless. "Ye shall have your word for me. Duckworth and Shelton is the word. And here, to the illustration, is Shelton on my shoulders, and to Duckworth do I carry him." "Pass, Lawless," said the sentry. "And where is John?" asked the Grey Friar. "He holdeth the court, by the mass, and taketh rents, as to the manor born," replied another of the company. So it proved. When Lawless got as far up the village as the little inn, he found Ellis Duckworth surrounded by Sir Daniel's tenants, and, by the right of his good company of archers, coolly taking rents, and giving written receipts in return for them. By the faces of the tenants, it was plain how little this proceeding pleased them, for they argued very rightly that they would simply have to pay them twice. As soon as he knew what had brought Lawless, Ellis dismissed the remainder of the tenants, and, with every mark of interest and apprehension, conducted Dick into an inner chamber of the inn. There the lad's hurts were looked to, and he was recalled, by simple remedies, to consciousness. "Dear lad," said Ellis, pressing his hand, "y' are in a friend's hands that loved your father, and loves you for his sake. Rest ye a little quietly, for ye are somewhat out of case. Then shall ye tell me your story, and betwixt the two of us we shall find a remedy for all." A little later in the day, and after Dick had awakened from a comfortable slumber to find himself still very weak, but clearer in mind and easier in body, Ellis returned, and sitting down by the bedside, begged him, in the name of his father, to relate the circumstance of his escape from Tunstall Moat House. There was something in the strength of Duckworth's frame, in the honesty of his brown face, in the clearness and shrewdness of his eyes, that moved Dick to obey him, and from first to last the lad told him the story of his 2 days' adventures. "Well," said Ellis, when he had done, "see what the kind saints have done for you, Dick Shelton, not alone to save your body in so numerous and deadly perils, but to bring you into my hands that have no dearer wish than to assist your father's son. Be but true to me, and I see ye are true, and betwixt you and me we shall bring that false heart traitor to the death." "Will ye assault the house?" asked Dick. "I were mad, indeed, to think of it," returned Ellis. "He hath too much power. His men gather to him. Those that gave me the slip last night, and by the mass came in so handily for you, those have made him safe. Nay, Dick, to the contrary, thou and I and my brave bowmen, we must all slip from this forest speedily, and leave Sir Daniel free." "My mind misgiveth me for Jack," said the lad. "For Jack?" repeated Duckworth. "Oh, I see, for the wench. Nay, Dick, I promise you, if there come talk of any marriage, we shall act at once. Till then, or till the time is ripe, we shall all disappear, even like shadows at morning. Sir Daniel shall look east and west, and see none enemies. He shall think, by the mass, that he hath dreamed a while, and hath now awakened in his bed. But our 4 eyes, Dick, shall follow him right close, and our 4 hands, so help us all the army of the saints, shall bring that traitor low." 2 days later, Sir Daniel's garrison had grown to such a strength that he ventured on a sally, and at the head of some 20 horsemen, pushed without opposition as far as Tunstall hamlet. Not an arrow flew, not a man stirred in the thicket. The bridge was no longer guarded, but stood open to all corners, and as Sir Daniel crossed it, he saw the villagers looking timidly from their doors. Presently, one of them, taking heart of grace, came forward, and with the lowliest salutations presented a letter to the knight. His face darkened as he read the contents. It ran thus: "To the most untrue and cruel gentleman, Sir Daniel Brackley, Knight. these. I find ye were untrue and unkind from the first. Ye have my father's blood upon your hands. Let be, it will not wash. Some day ye shall perish by my procurement. So much I let you to wit. And I let you to wit farther, that if ye seek to wed to any other the gentlewoman Mistress Joan Sedley, whom that I am bound upon a great oath to wed myself, the blow will be very swift. The first step therein will be thy first step to the grave. Richard Shelton. End of Book 2, Chapter 5.
Chapter 1 of The Black Arrow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Book 3, My Lord Foxham. Chapter 1, The House by the Shore. Months had passed away since Richard Shelton made his escape from the hands of his guardian. These months had been eventful for England. The party of Lancaster, which was then in the very article of death, had once more raised its head. The Yorkists defeated and dispersed, their leader butchered on the field, it seemed for a very brief season in the winter following upon the events already recorded, as if the house of Lancaster had finally triumphed over its foes. The small town of Sorby on the Till was full of the Lancasterian nobles of the neighbourhood. Earl Risingham was there, with 300 men-at-arms, Lord Shoreby with 200, Sir Daniel himself, high in favour and once more growing rich on confiscations, lay in a house of his own on the main street with 80 men. The world had changed indeed. It was a black, bitter cold evening in the first week of January, with a hard frost, a high wind, and every likelihood of snow before the morning. In an obscure alehouse in a by-street near the harbour, 3 or 4 men sat drinking ale and eating a hasty mess of eggs. They were all likely, lusty, weather-beaten fellows, hard of hand, bold of eye, and though they wore plain tabards like country ploughmen, even a drunken soldier might have looked twice before he sought a quarrel in such company. A little apart before the huge fire sat a younger man, almost a boy, dressed in much the same fashion, though it was easy to see by his looks that he was better born, and might have worn a sword, had the time suited. "Nay," said one of the men at the table, "I like it not. Ill will come of it. This is no place for jolly fellows. A jolly fellow loveth open country, good cover, and scarce foes. But here we are, shut in a town, girt about with enemies, and, for the bull's-eye of misfortune, see if it snow not ere the morning." "'Tis for Master Shelton there," said another, nodding his head towards the lad before the fire. "I will do much for Master Shelton," returned the first, "but to come to the gallows for any man, nay, brothers, not that." The door of the inn opened, and another man entered hastily, and approached the youth before the fire. "Master Shelton," he said, "Sir Daniel goeth forth with a pair of links and 4 archers." Dick, for this was our young friend, rose instantly to his feet. "Lawless," he said, "ye will take John Capper's watch. Greensheve, follow with me. Capper, lead forward. We will go with him this time, and he go to York." The next moment they were outside in the dark street, and Capper, the man who had just come, pointed to where 2 torches flared in the wind at a little distance. The town was already sound asleep. No one moved upon the streets, and there was nothing easier than to follow the party without observation. The 2 link-bearers went first. Next followed a single man, whose long cloak blew about him in the wind, and the rear was brought up by the 4 archers, each with his bow upon his arm. They moved at a brisk walk, threading the intricate lanes and drawing nearer to the shore. "He hath gone each night in this direction?" asked Dick in a whisper. "This is the 3rd night running, Master Shelton," returned Capper, "and still at the same hour, and with the same small following, as though his end were secret." Sir Daniel and his 6 men were now come to the outskirts of the country. Shoreby was an open town, and though the Lancastrian lords who lay there kept a strong guard on the main roads, it was still possible to enter or depart unseen by any of the lesser streets or across the open country. The lane which Sir Daniel had been following came to an abrupt end. Before him there was a stretch of rough down, and the noise of the sea surf was audible upon one hand. There were no guards in the neighbourhood, nor any light in that quarter of the town. Dick and his 2 outlaws drew a little closer to the object of their chase, and presently, as they came forth from between the houses and could see a little further upon either hand, they were aware of another torch drawing near from another direction. "Hey!" said Dick, "I smell treason." Meanwhile, Sir Daniel had come to a full halt. The torches were stuck into the sand, and the men lay down as if to await the arrival of the other party. This drew near at a good rate. It consisted of 4 men only, a pair of archers, a varlet with a link, and a cloaked gentleman walking in their midst. "Is it you, my lord?" cried Sir Daniel. "It is I, indeed. And if ever true knight gave proof, I am that man," replied the leader of the second troop. "For who would not rather face giants, sorcerers, or pagans than this pinching cold?" "My lord," returned Sir Daniel, "beauty will be the more beholden, misdoubt it not. But shall we forth? For the sooner ye have seen my merchandise, the sooner shall we both get home." "But why keep ye her here, good knight?" inquired the other. "An she be so young, and so fair, and so wealthy, why do ye not bring her forth among her mates? Ye would soon make her a good marriage, and no need to freeze your fingers and risk arrow shots by going abroad at such untimely seasons in the dark." "I have told you, my lord," replied Sir Daniel. "The reason thereof concerneth me only. Neither do I propose to explain it further. Suffice it that if ye be weary of your old gossip, Daniel Brackley, publish it abroad that ye are to wed Joanna Sedley, and I give you my word ye will be quit of him right soon. Ye will find him with an arrow in his back." Meantime, the 2 gentlemen were walking briskly forward over the down, the 3 torches going before them, stooping against the wind and scattering clouds of smoke and tufts of flame, and the rear brought up by the 6 archers. Close upon the heels of these, Dick followed. He had, of course, heard no word of this conversation, but he had recognised in the second of the speakers old Lord Shoreby himself, a man of infamous reputation, whom even Sir Daniel affected, in public, to condemn. Presently they came close down upon the beach. The air smelt salt. The noise of the surf increased, and here, in a large walled garden, there stood a small house of 2 stories, with stables and other offices. The foremost torchbearer unlocked a door in the wall, and after the whole party had passed into the garden, again closed and locked it on the other side. Dick and his men were thus excluded from any further following, unless they should scale the wall and thus put their necks in a trap. They sat down in a tuft of furze and waited. The red glow of the torches moved up and down, to and fro within the enclosure, as if the link bearers steadily patrolled the garden. 20 minutes passed, and then the whole party issued forth again upon the down, and Sir Daniel and the baron, after the elaborate salutation, separated and turned severally homeward, each with his own following of men and lights. As soon as the sound of the steps had been swallowed by the wind, Dick got to his feet, as briskly as he was able, for he was stiff and aching with the cold. "Capper, ye will give me a back-up," he said. They advanced, all 3, to the wall. Capper stooped, and Dick, getting upon his shoulders, clambered on to the copstone. "Now, Greensheve," whispered Dick, "follow me up here. Lie flat upon your face, that ye may be less seen, and be ever ready to give me a hand if I fall foully on the other side." And so saying, he dropped into the garden. It was all pitch dark. There was no light in the house. The wind whistled shrill among the poor shrubs, and the surf beat upon the beach. There was no other sound. Cautiously Dick footed it forth, stumbling among the bushes and groping with his hands, and presently the crisp noise of gravel underfoot told him that he had struck upon an alley. Here he paused, and taking his crossbow from where he kept it concealed under his long tabard, he prepared it for instant action, and went forward once more with greater resolution and assurance. The path led him straight to the group of buildings. All seemed to be sorely dilapidated. The windows of the house were secured by crazy shutters. The stables were open and empty. There was no hay in the hayloft, no corn in the corn box. Anyone would have supposed the place to be deserted. But Dick had good reason to think otherwise. He continued his inspection, visiting the offices, trying all the windows. At length he came round to the seaside of the house, and there, sure enough, there burned a pale light in one of the upper windows. He stepped back a little way, till he thought he could see the movement of a shadow on the wall of the apartment. Then he remembered that in the stable his groping hand had rested for a moment on a ladder, and he returned with all dispatch to bring it. The ladder was very short, but yet, by standing on the topmost round, he could bring his hands as high as the iron bars of the window, and seizing these, he raised his body by main force until his eyes commanded the interior of the room. Two persons were within. The first he readily knew to be Dame Hatch; the second, a tall and beautiful and grave young lady in a long embroidered dress. Could that be Joanna Sedley, his old wood companion Jack, whom he had thought to punish with a belt? He dropped back again to the top round of the ladder in a kind of amazement. He had never thought of his sweetheart as of so superior a being, and he was instantly taken with a feeling of diffidence. But he had little opportunity for thought. A low "hist" sounded from close by, and he hastened to descend the ladder. "Who goes?" he whispered. "Greensheve," came the reply, in tones similarly guarded. "What want ye?" asked Dick. "The house is watched, Master Shelton," returned the outlaw. "We are not alone to watch it, for even as I lay on my belly on the wall, I saw men prowling in the dark, and heard them whistle softly one to the other." "By my sooth," said Dick, "but this is passing strange. Were they not men of Sir Daniel's?" "Nay, sir, that they are not," returned Greensheve; "for if I have eyes in my head, every man jack of them weareth me a white badge in his bonnet, something chequered with dark." "White, chequered with dark?" repeated Dick. "Faith, 'tis a badge I know not. It is none of this country's badges. Well, an that be so, let us slip as quietly forth from this garden as we may, for here we are in an evil posture for defence. Beyond all question, there are men of Sir Daniel's in that house, and to be taken between two shots is a beggarman's position. Take me this ladder. I must leave it where I found it." They returned the ladder to the stable, and groped their way to the place where they had entered. Capper had taken Greensheve's position on the cope, and now he leaned down his hand, and first one and then the other pulled them up. Cautiously and silently they dropped again upon the other side, nor did they dare speak until they had returned to their old ambush in the gorse. "Now, John Capper," said Dick, "back with you to Shoreby, even as for your life. Bring me instantly what men ye can collect. Here shall be the rendezvous; or if the men be scattered, and the day be near at hand before they muster, let the place be something further back, and by the entering in of the town. Greensheve and I lie here to watch. Speed ye, John Capper, and the saints aid you to despatch. And now, Greensheve," he continued, as soon as Capper had departed, "let thou and I go round about the garden in a wide circuit. I would fain see whether thine eyes betrayed thee." Keeping well outwards from the wall, and profiting by every height and hollow, they passed about two sides, beholding nothing. On the third side, the garden wall was built close upon the beach, and to preserve the distance necessary to their purpose, they had to go some way down upon the sands. Although the tide was still pretty far out, the surf was so high, and the sands so flat, that at each breaker a great sheet of froth and water came careering over the expanse, and Dick and Greensheve made this part of their inspection wading, now to the ankles, and now as deep as to the knees, in the salt and icy waters of the German Ocean. Suddenly, against the comparative whiteness of the garden wall, the figure of a man was seen, like a faint Chinese shadow, violently signalling with both arms. As he dropped again to the earth, another rose a little further on and repeated the same performance. And so, like a silent watchword, these gesticulations made the round of the beleaguered garden. "They keep good watch," Dick whispered. "Let us back to land, good master," answered Greensheve. "We stand here too open; for look ye, when the seas break heavy and white out there behind us, they shall see us plainly against the foam." "Ye speak sooth," returned Dick. "Ashore with us, right speedily." End of Book 3, Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Black Arrow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 3, Chapter 2. A Skirmish in the Dark. Thoroughly drenched and chilled, the two adventurers returned to their position in the gorse. "I pray Heaven that Capper makes good speed," said Dick. "I vow a candle to St. Mary of Shoreby if he come before the hour." "Ye're in a hurry, Master Dick?" asked Greensheve. "Ay, good fellow," answered Dick, "for in that house lieth my lady whom I love; and who should these be that lie about her secretly by night? Unfriends, for sure." "Well," returned Greensheve, "an John come speedily, we shall give a good account of them. They are not 20 at the outside; I judge so by the spacing of their sentries; and, taking where they are, lying so widely, 10 would scatter them like sparrows. And yet, Master Dick, an she be in Sir Daniel's power already, it will little hurt that she should change into another's. Who should these be?" "I do suspect the Lord of Shoreby," Dick replied. "When came they?" "They began to come, Master Dick," said Greensheve, "about the time ye crossed the wall. I had not lain there the space of a minute ere I marked the first of the knaves crawling round the corner." The last light had been already extinguished in the little house when they were wading in the wash of the breakers, and it was impossible to predict at what moment the lurking men about the garden wall might make their onslaught. Of two evils, Dick preferred the least. He preferred that Joanna should remain under the guardianship of Sir Daniel rather than pass into the clutches of Lord Shoreby; and his mind was made up, if the house should be assaulted, to come at once to the relief of the besieged. But the time passed, and still there was no movement. From quarter of an hour to quarter of an hour the same signal passed about the garden wall, as if the leader desired to assure himself of the vigilance of his scattered followers. But in every other particular the neighbourhood of the little house lay undisturbed. Presently Dick's reinforcements began to arrive. The night was not yet old before nearly a score of men crouched beside him in the gorse. Separating these into two bodies, he took the command of the smaller himself, and entrusted the larger to the leadership of Greensheve. "Now, Kit," he said to this at last, "take me your men to the near angle of the garden wall upon the beach. Post them strongly, and wait till ye hear me falling upon the other side. It is those upon the sea front that I would fain make certain of, for there will be the leader. The rest will run; even let them. And now, lads, let no man draw an arrow. Ye will but hurt friends. Take to the steel, and keep to the steel. And if we have the uppermost, I promise every man of you a gold noble when I come to mine estate." Out of the odd collection of broken men, thieves, murderers, and ruined peasantry whom Duckworth had gathered together to serve the purposes of his revenge, some of the boldest and most experienced in war had volunteered to follow Richard Shelton. The service of watching Sir Daniel's movements in the town of Shoreby had from the first been irksome to their temper, and they had of late began to grumble loudly and threaten to disperse. The prospect of a sharp encounter and possible spoils restored them to good humour, and they joyfully prepared for battle. Their long tabards thrown aside, they appeared, some in plain green jerkins, and some in stout leathern jacks. Under their hoods many wore bonnets strengthened by iron plates, and for offensive armour, swords, daggers, a few stout boar spears, and a dozen of bright bills put them in a posture to engage even regular feudal troops. The bows, quivers, and tabards were concealed among the gorse, and the two bands set resolutely forward. Dick, when he had reached the other side of the house, posted his 6 men in a line, about 20 yards from the garden wall, and took position himself a few paces in front. Then they all shouted with one voice, and closed upon the enemy. These, lying widely scattered, stiff with cold, and taken unawares, sprang stupidly to their feet and stood undecided. Before they had time to get their courage about them, or even to form an idea of the number and mettle of their assailants, a similar shout of onslaught sounded in their ears from the far side of the enclosure. Thereupon they gave themselves up for lost, and ran. In this way the two small troops of the men of the Black Arrow closed upon the sea front of the garden wall, and took a part of the strangers, as it were, between two fires, while the whole of the remainder ran for their lives in different directions, and were soon scattered in the darkness. For all that, the fight was but beginning. Dick's outlaws, although they had the advantage of surprise, were still considerably outnumbered by the men they had surrounded. The tide had flowed in the meanwhile, the beach was narrowed to a strip, and on this wet field, between the surf and the garden wall, there began, in darkness, a doubtful, furious, and deadly contest. The strangers were well armed. They fell in silence upon their assailants, and the affray became a series of single combats. Dick, who had come first into the mêlée, was engaged by 3. The first he cut down at the first blow, but the other 2 coming upon him hotly, he was fain to give ground before their onset. One of these 2 was a huge fellow, almost a giant for stature, and armed with a 2-handed sword, which he brandished like a switch. Against this opponent, with his reach of arm and the lengthened weight of his weapon, Dick and his bill were quite defenceless; and had the other continued to join vigorously in the attack, the lad must have indubitably fallen. This second man, however, less in stature and slower in his movements, paused for a moment to peer about him in the darkness, and to give ear to the sounds of the battle. The giant still pursued his advantage, and still Dick fled before him, spying for his chance. Then the huge blade flashed and descended, and the lad, leaping on one side and running in, slashed sideways and upwards with his bill. A roar of agony responded, and before the wounded man could raise his formidable weapon, Dick, twice repeating his blow, had brought him to the ground. The next moment he was engaged upon more equal terms with his second pursuer. Here there was no great difference in size, and though the man, fighting with sword and dagger against a bill, and being wary and quick of fence, had a certain superiority of arms, Dick more than made it up by his greater agility on foot. Neither at first gained any obvious advantage, but the older man was still immensely profiting by the ardour of the younger to lead him where he would; and presently Dick found that they had crossed the whole width of the beach, and were now fighting above the knees in the spume and bubble of the breakers. Here his own superior activity was rendered useless. He found himself more or less at the discretion of his foe. Yet a little, and he had his back turned upon his own men, and saw that this adroit and skilful adversary was bent upon drawing him further and further away. Dick ground his teeth. He determined to decide the combat instantly, and when the wash of the next wave had ebbed and left him dry, he rushed in, caught a blow upon his bill, and leaped right at the throat of his opponent. The man went down backwards, with Dick still upon the top of him, and the next wave, speedily succeeding the last, buried him below a rush of water. While he was still submerged, Dick forced his dagger from his grasp, and rose to his feet victorious. "Yield ye," he said. "I give you life." "I yield me," said the other, getting to his knees. "Ye fight like a young man, ignorantly and foolhardily; but by the array of the saints, ye fight bravely." Dick turned to the beach. The combat was still raging doubtfully in the night. Over the hoarse roar of the breakers, steel clanged upon steel, and cries of pain and the shout of battle resounded. "Lead me to your captain, youth," said the conquered knight. "It is fit this butchery should cease." "Sir," replied Dick, "so far as these brave fellows have a captain, the poor gentleman who addresses you is he." "Call off your dogs, then, and I will bid my villains hold," returned the other. There was something noble both in the voice and manner of his late opponent, and Dick instantly dismissed all fears of treachery. "Lay down your arms, men," cried the stranger knight. "I have yielded me, upon promise of life." The tone of the stranger was one of absolute command, and almost instantly the din and confusion of the melee ceased. "Lawless," cried Dick, "are ye safe?" "Ay," cried Lawless, "safe and hearty." "Light me the lantern," said Dick. "Is not Sir Daniel here?" inquired the knight. "Sir Daniel?" echoed Dick. "Now, by the rood, I pray not. It would go ill with me if he were." "Ill with you, fair sir?" inquired the other. "Nay, then, if ye be not of Sir Daniel's party, I profess I comprehend no longer. Wherefore, then, fell ye upon mine ambush? In what quarrel, my young and very fiery friend? To what earthly purpose? And to make a clear end of questioning, to what good gentleman have I surrendered?" But before Dick could answer, a voice spoke in the darkness from close by. Dick could see the speaker's black and white badge, and the respectful salute which he addressed to his superior. "My lord," said he, "if these gentlemen be unfriends to Sir Daniel, it is a pity, indeed. We should have been at blows with them, but it were tenfold greater that either they or we should linger here. The watchers in the house, unless they be all dead or deaf, have heard our hammering this quarter hour agone. Instantly they have signalled to the town, and unless we be the livelier in our departure, we are like to be taken, both of us, by a fresh foe. Hawksley is in the right," added the lord. "How please ye, sir? Whither shall we march?" "Nay, my lord," said Dick, "go where ye will for me. I do begin to suspect we have some ground of friendship; and if indeed I begin our acquaintance somewhat ruggedly, I would not churlishly continue. Let us then separate, my lord, you laying your right hand in mine, and at the hour and place that ye shall name, let us encounter and agree." "Ye are too trustful, boy," said the other. "But this time your trust is not misplaced. I will meet you at the point of day at St. Bride's Cross. Come, lads, follow." The strangers disappeared from the scene with a rapidity that seemed suspicious; and while the outlaws fell to the congenial task of rifling the dead bodies, Dick made once more the circuit of the garden wall to examine the front of the house. In a little upper loophole of the roof he beheld a light set; and as it would certainly be visible in town from the back windows of Sir Daniel's mansion, he doubted not that this was the signal feared by Hawksley, and that ere long the lances of the Knight of Tunstall would arrive upon the scene. He put his ear to the ground, and it seemed to him as if he heard a jarring and hollow noise from townward. Back to the beach he went, hurrying. But the work was already done. The last body was disarmed and stripped to the skin, and four fellows were already wading seaward to commit it to the mercies of the deep. A few minutes later, when there debouched out of the nearest lanes of Shoreby some 20 horsemen, hastily arrayed and moving at the gallop of their steeds, the neighbourhood of the house beside the sea was entirely silent and deserted. Meanwhile, Dick and his men had returned to the alehouse of the Goat and Bagpipes to snatch some hours of sleep before the morning tryst. End of Book 3, Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Black Arrow. The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 3, Chapter 3. St. Bride's Cross. St. Bride's Cross stood a little way back from Shoreby, on the skirts of Tunstall Forest. Two roads met, one from Holywood across the forest, one that road from Risingdom, down which we saw the wrecks of a Lancasterian army fleeing in disorder. Here the two joined issue, and went on together down the hill to Shoreby. And a little back from the point of junction, the summit of a little knoll was crowned by the ancient and weather-beaten cross. Here, then, about 7 in the morning, Dick arrived. It was as cold as ever. The earth was all grey and silver with the hoarfrost, and the day began to break in the east with many colours of purple and orange. Dick set him down upon the lowest step of the cross, wrapped himself well in his tabard, and looked vigilantly upon all sides. He had not long to wait. Down the road from Holywood, a gentleman in very rich and bright armour, and wearing over that a surcoat of the rarest furs, came pacing on a splendid charger. 20 yards behind him followed a clump of lancers, but these halted as soon as they came in view of the trysting place, while the gentleman in the fur surcoat continued to advance alone. His visor was raised, and showed a countenance of great command and dignity, answerable to the richness of his attire and arms. And it was with some confusion of manner that Dick arose from the cross and stepped down the bank to meet his prisoner. "I thank you, my lord, for your exactitude," he said, louting very low. "Will it please your lordship to set foot to earth?" "Are ye here alone, young man?" inquired the other. "I was not so simple," answered Dick. "And to be plain with your lordship, the woods upon either hand of this cross lie full of mine honest fellows lying on their weapons." "Ye have done wisely," said the lord. "It pleases me the rather, since last night ye fought foolhardily, and more like a savage Saracen lunatic than any Christian warrior. But it becomes not to me to complain that had the undermost." "Ye had the undermost indeed, my lord, since ye so fell," returned Dick. "But had the waves not holpen me, it was I that should have had the worst. Ye were pleased to make me yours with several dagger marks, which I still carry. And in fine, my lord, methinks I had all the danger, as well as all the profit, of that little blind man's medley on the beach." "Y' are shrewd enough to make light of it, I see," returned the stranger. "Nay, my lord, not shrewd," replied Dick. "In that I shoot at no advantage to myself. But when, by the light of this new day, I see how stout a knight hath yielded, not to my arms alone, but to fortune and the darkness and the surf, and how easily the battle had gone otherwise, with a soldier so untried and rustic as myself, think it not strange, my lord, if I feel confounded with my victory." "Ye speak well," said the stranger. "Your name?" "My name, an't like you, is Shelton," answered Dick. "Men call me the Lord Foxham," added the other. "Then, my lord, and under your good favour, ye are guardian to the sweetest maid in England," replied Dick. "And for your ransom, and the ransom of such as were taken with you on the beach, there will be no uncertainty of terms. I pray you, my lord, of your good will and charity, yield me the hand of my mistress, Joan Sedley, and take ye upon the other part your liberty, the liberty of these your followers, and, if ye will have it, my gratitude and service till I die." "But are ye not ward to Sir Daniel? Methought of ye are Harry Shelton's son, that I had heard it so reported," said Lord Foxham. "Will it please you, my lord, to alight? I would fain tell you fully who I am, how situate, and why so bold in my demands. Beseech you, my lord, take place upon these steps, hear me to a full end, and judge me with allowance." And so saying, Dick lent a hand to Lord Foxham to dismount, led him up the knoll to the cross, installed him in the place where he had himself been sitting, and standing respectfully before his noble prisoner, related the story of his fortunes up to the events of the evening before. Lord Foxham listened gravely, and when Dick had done, "Master Shelton," he said, "ye are a most fortunate unfortunate young gentleman. But what fortune ye have had! that ye have amply merited, and what unfortune ye have no ways deserved. Be of good cheer, for ye have made a friend who is devoid neither of power nor favour. For yourself, although it fits not for a person of your birth to herd with outlaws, I must own ye are both brave and honourable, very dangerous in battle, right courteous in peace, a youth of excellent disposition and brave bearing. For your estates, ye will never see them till the world shall change again. So long as Lancaster hath the strong hand, so shall Sir Daniel enjoy them for his own. For my ward, it is another matter. I had promised her before to a gentleman, a kinsman of my house, one Hamley. The promise is old." "Ay, my lord, and now Sir Daniel hath promised her to my Lord Shoreby," interrupted Dick. "And this promise, for all it is but young, is still the likelier to be made good." "'Tis the plain truth," returned his lordship. "And considering, moreover, that I am your prisoner upon no better composition than my bare life, and over and above that the maiden is unhappily in other hands, I will so far consent. Aid me with your good fellows." "My lord," cried Dick, "they are these same outlaws that ye blame me for consorting with." "Let them be what they will, they can fight," returned Lord Foxham. "Help me, then, and if between us we regain the maid, upon my knightly honour she shall marry you." Dick bent his knee before his prisoner, but he, leaping up lightly from the cross, caught the lad up and embraced him like a son. "Come," he said, "an ye are to marry Joan, we must be early friends." End of Book 3, Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Black Arrow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 3, Chapter 4 The Good Hope. An hour thereafter, Dick was back at the Goat and Bagpipes, breaking his fast and receiving the report of his messengers and sentries. Duckworth was still absent from Shoreby, and this was frequently the case, for he played many parts in the world, shared many different interests, and conducted many various affairs. He had founded that fellowship of the Black Arrow, as a ruined man longing for vengeance and money; and yet, among those who knew him best, he was thought to be the agent and emissary of the great king maker of England, Richard, Earl of Warwick. In his absence, at any rate, it fell upon Richard Shelton to command affairs in Shoreby; and as he sat at meat, his mind was full of care, and his face heavy with consideration. It had been determined between him and the Lord Foxham to make one bold stroke that evening, and by brute force to set Joanna free. The obstacles, however, were many, and as one after another of his scouts arrived, each brought him more discomfortable news. Sir Daniel was alarmed by the skirmish of the night before. He had increased the garrison of the house in the garden, but, not content with that, he had stationed horsemen in the neighbouring lanes, so that he might have instant word of any movement. Meanwhile, in the court of his mansion, steeds stood saddled, and the riders, armed at every point, awaited but the signal to ride. The adventure of the night appeared more and more difficult of execution, till suddenly Dick's countenance lighted. "Lawless," he cried, "you that were a shipped man, can ye steal me a ship?" "Master Dick," replied Lawless, "if ye would back me, I would agree to steal the York Minster." Presently after, these two set forth and descended to the harbour. It was a considerable basin, lying among sandhills, and surrounded with patches of down, ancient ruinous lumber, and tumble-down slums of the town. Many decked ships and many open boats either lay there at anchor, or had been drawn up on the beach. A long duration of bad weather had driven them from the high seas into the shelter of the port; and the great trooping of black clouds, and the cold squalls that followed one after another, now with a sprinkling of dry snow, now in a mere swoop of wind, promised no improvement, but rather threatened a more serious storm in the immediate future. The seamen, in view of the cold and wind, had, for the most part, slunk ashore, and were now roaring and singing in the shoreside taverns. Many of the ships already rode unguarded at their anchors; and as the day wore on, and the weather offered no appearance of improvement, the number was continually being augmented. It was to these deserted ships, and above all to those of them that lay far out, that Lawless directed his attention, while Dick, seated upon an anchor that was half embedded in the sand, and giving ear now to the rude, potent, and boding voices of the gale, and now to the hoarse singing of the shipmen in a neighbouring tavern, soon forgot his immediate surroundings and concerns in the agreeable recollection of Lord Foxham's promise. He was disturbed by a touch upon his shoulder. It was Lawless, pointing to a small ship that lay somewhat by itself, and within but a little of the harbour mouth, where it heaved regularly and smoothly on the entering swell. A pale gleam of winter sunshine fell at that moment on the vessel's deck, relieving her against a bank of scowling cloud; and in this momentary glitter Dick could see a couple of men hauling the skiff alongside. "There, sir," said Lawless, "mark ye it well. There is the ship for to night." Presently the skiff put out from the vessel's side, and the two men, keeping their head well to the wind, pulled lustily for shore. Lawless turned to a loiterer. "How call ye her?" he asked, pointing to the little vessel. "They call her the Good Hope of Dartmouth," replied the loiterer. "Her captain, Arblaster by name. He pulleth the bow oar in yon skiff." This was all that Lawless wanted. Hurriedly thanking the man, he moved round the shore to a certain sandy creek, for which the skiff was heading. There he took up his position, and as soon as they were within earshot, opened fire on the sailors of the Good Hope. "What, gossip Arblaster!" he cried. "Why, ye be well met. May gossip be ye right well met upon the rood. And this is the Good Hope? Ay, I would know her among 10,000. A sweet sheer, a sweet boat. But marry come up, my gossip, will ye drink? I have come into mine estate, which doubtless ye remember to have heard on. I am now rich. I have left to sail upon the sea. I do sail now, for the most part, upon spiced ale. Come, fellow, thy hand upon it. Come, drink with an old shipfellow." Skipper Arblaster, a long faced, elderly, weather beaten man, with a knife hanging about his neck by a plaited cord, and for all the world like any modern seaman in his gait and bearing, had hung back in obvious amazement and distrust. But the name of an estate, and a certain air of tipsified simplicity and good fellowship, which Lawless very well affected, combined to conquer his suspicious jealousy. His countenance relaxed, and he at once extended his open hand and squeezed that of the outlaw in a formidable grasp. "Nay," he said, "I cannot mind you. But what o' that? I would drink with any man, gossip, and so would my man Tom. Man Tom," he added, addressing his follower, "here is my gossip, whose name I cannot mind, but no doubt a very good seaman. Let's go drink with him and his shore friend." Lawless led the way, and they were soon seated in an alehouse, which, as it was very new, and stood in an exposed and solitary station, was less crowded than those nearer to the centre of the port. It was but a shed of timber, much like a blockhouse in the backwoods of to day, and was coarsely furnished with a press or two, a number of naked benches, and boards set upon barrels to play the part of tables. In the middle, and besieged by 100 violent draughts, a fire of wrecked wood blazed and vomited thick smoke. "Ay, now," said Lawless, "here's a shipman's joy: a good fire and a good stiff cup ashore, with foul weather without, and an off sea gale a snoring in the roof. Here's to the Good Hope. May she ride easy." "Ay," said Skipper Arblaster, "'tis good weather to be ashore in, that is sooth. Man Tom, how say ye to that? Gossip, ye speak well, though I can never think upon your name. But ye speak very well. May the Good Hope ride easy. Amen." "Friend Dickon," resumed Lawless, addressing his commander, "ye have certain matters on hand, unless I err. Well, prithee be about them incontinently, for here I be with the choice of all good company, two tough old shipmen. Until that ye return, I will go warrant these brave fellows will bide here and drink me cup for cup. We are not like shoremen, we old tough Terry Johns." "It is well meant," returned the skipper. "Ye can go, boy, for I will keep your good friend and my good gossip company till curfew, ay, and by St. Mary till the sun get up again. For look ye, when a man hath been long enough at sea, the salt getteth me into the clay upon his bones; and let him drink a draw well, he will never be quenched." Thus encouraged upon all hands, Dick rose, saluted his company, and going forth again into the gusty afternoon, got him, as speedily as he might, to the Goat and Bagpipes. Thence he sent word to my Lord Foxham that, so soon as ever the evening closed, they would have a stout boat to keep the sea in; and then, leading along with him a couple of outlaws who had some experience of the sea, he returned himself to the harbour and the little sandy creek. The skiff of the Good Hope lay among many others, from which it was easily distinguished by its extreme smallness and fragility. Indeed, when Dick and his two men had taken their places and begun to put forth out of the creek into the open harbour, the little cockle dipped into the swell and staggered under every gust of wind, like a thing upon the point of sinking. The Good Hope, as we have said, was anchored far out, where the swell was heaviest. No other vessel lay nearer than several cables' length. Those that were the nearest were themselves entirely deserted, and as the skip approached, a thick flurry of snow and a sudden darkening of the weather further concealed the movements of the outlaws from all possible espial. In a trice they had leaped upon the heaving deck, and the skip was dancing at the stern. The Good Hope was captured. She was a good stout boat, decked in the bows and amidships, but open in the stern. She carried one mast, and was rigged between a felucca and a lugger. It would seem that Skipper Arblaster had made an excellent venture, for the hold was full of pieces of French wine, and in the little cabin, beside the Virgin Mary in the bulkhead, which proved the captain's piety, there were many lockfast chests and cupboards, which showed him to be rich and careful. A dog, who was the sole occupant of the vessel, furiously barked and bit the heels of the boarders, but he was soon kicked into the cabin, and the door shut upon his just resentment. A lamp was lit and fixed in the shrouds to mark the vessel clearly from the shore. One of the wine pieces in the hold was broached, and a cup of excellent Gascony emptied into the adventure of the evening. And then, while one of the outlaws began to get ready his bow and arrows, and prepared to hold the ship against all comers, the other hauled in the skip and got overboard, where he held on, waiting for Dick. "Well, Jack, keep a good watch," said the young commander, preparing to follow his subordinate. "Ye will do right well." "Why," returned Jack, "I shall do excellent well indeed, so long as we lie here. But once we put the nose of this poor ship outside the harbour, see, there she trembles. Nay, the poor shrew heard the words, and the heart misgave her in her oak tree ribs. But look, Master Dick, how black the weather gathers." The darkness ahead was indeed astonishing. Great billows heaved up out of the blackness, one after another; and one after another the Good Hope buoyantly climbed, and giddily plunged upon the further side. A thin sprinkle of snow and thin flakes of foam came flying and powdered the deck, and the wind harped dismally among the rigging. "In sooth, it looks evilly," said Dick. "But what cheer? 'Tis but a squall, and presently it will blow over." But in spite of his words, he was depressingly affected by the bleak disorder of the sky and the wailing and fluting of the wind. And as he got over the side of the Good Hope, and made once more for the landing creek with the best speed of oars, he crossed himself devoutly, and recommended to Heaven the lives of all who should adventure on the sea. At the landing creek there had already gathered about a dozen of the outlaws. To these the skiff was left, and they were bidden embark without delay. A little further up the beach, Dick found Lord Foxham hurrying in quest of him, his face concealed with a dark hood, and his bright armour covered by a long russet mantle of a poor appearance. "Young Shelton," he said, "are ye for sea, then, truly?" "My lord," replied Richard, "they lie about the house with horsemen. It may not be reached from the land side without alarm." And Sir Daniel, once advertised of our adventure, we can no more carry it to a good end than, saving your presence, we could ride upon the wind. Now, in going round by sea, we do run some peril by the elements; but what much outweigheth all, we have a chance to make good our purpose and bear off the maid." "Well," returned Lord Foxham, "lead on. I will, in some sort, follow you for shame's sake; but I own I would I were in bed." "Here, then," said Dick, "hither we go to fetch our pilot." And he led the way to the rude alehouse, where he had given rendezvous to a portion of his men. Some of these he found lingering round the door outside; others had pushed more boldly in, and choosing place as near as possible to where they saw their comrade, gathered close about Lawless and the two shipmen. These, to judge by the distempered countenance and cloudy eye, had long since gone beyond the boundaries of moderation; and as Richard entered, closely followed by Lord Foxham, they were all three tuning up an old, pitiful sea ditty to the chorus of the wailing of the gale. The young leader cast a rapid glance about the shed. The fire had just been replenished, and gave forth volumes of black smoke, so that it was difficult to see clearly in the further corners. It was plain, however, that the outlaws very largely outnumbered the remainder of the guests. Satisfied upon this point, in case of any failure in the operation of his plan, Dick strode up to the table, and resumed his place upon the bench. "Hey!" cried the skipper tipsily. "Who are ye? Hey!" "I want a word with you without, Master Arblaster," returned Dick. "And here is what we shall talk of." And he showed him a gold noble in the glimmer of the firelight. The shipman's eyes burned, although he still failed to recognise our hero. "Ay, boy," he said, "I am with you. Gossip, I will be back anon. Drink fair, gossip." And taking Dick's arm to steady his uneven steps, he walked to the door of the alehouse. As soon as he was over the threshold, 10 strong arms had seized and bound him; and in 2 minutes more, with his limbs trussed one to another and a good gag in his mouth, he had been tumbled neck and crop into a neighbouring hay barn. Presently, his man Tom, similarly secured, was tossed beside him, and the pair were left to their uncouth reflections for the night. And now, as the time for concealment had gone by, Lord Foxham's followers were summoned by a preconcerted signal, and the party, boldly taking possession of as many boats as their numbers required, pulled in a flotilla for the light in the rigging of the ship. Long before the last man had climbed to the deck of the Good Hope, the sound of furious shouting from the shore showed that a part, at least, of the seamen had discovered the loss of their skiffs. But it was now too late, whether for recovery or revenge. Out of some 40 fighting men now mustered in the stolen ship, 8 had been to sea, and could play the part of mariners. With the aid of these, a slice of sail was got upon her, the cable was cut. Lawless, vacillating on his feet, and still shouting the chorus of sea ballads, took the long tiller in his hands, and the Good Hope began to flit forward into the darkness of the night, and to face the great waves beyond the harbour bar. Richard took his place beside the weather rigging. Except for the ship's own lantern, and for some lights in Shoreby town that were already fading to leeward, the whole world of air was as black as in a pit. Only from time to time, as the Good Hope swooped dizzily down into the valley of the rollers, a crest would break. A great cataract of snowy foam would leap in one instant into being, and in an instant more would stream into the wake and vanish. Many of the men lay holding on and praying aloud. Many more were sick, and had crept into the bottom, where they sprawled among the cargo. And what with the extreme violence of the motion, and the continued drunken bravado of Lawless, still shouting and singing at the helm, the stoutest heart on board may have nourished a shrewd misgiving as to the result. But Lawless, as if guided by an instinct, steered the ship across the breakers, struck the lee of a great sandbank, where they sailed for a while in smooth water, and presently after laid her alongside a rude stone pier, where she was hastily made fast, and lay ducking and grinding in the dark. End of Book 3, Chapter 4. 3, Chapter 5 of The Black Arrow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 3, Chapter 5. The Good Hope, continued. The pier was not far distant from the house in which Joanna lay. It now only remained to get the men on shore, to surround the house with a strong party, burst in the door, and carry off the captive. They might then regard themselves as done with the Good Hope. It had placed them on the rear of their enemies, and the retreat, whether they should succeed or fail in the main enterprise, would be directed with a greater measure of hope in the direction of the forest and my Lord Foxham's reserve. To get the men on shore, however, was no easy task. Many had been sick, all were pierced with cold. The promiscuity and disorder on board had shaken their discipline. The movement of the ship and the darkness of the night had cowed their spirits. They made a rush upon the pier. My lord, with his sword drawn on his own retainers, must throw himself in front, and this impulse of rabblement was not restrained without a certain clamour of voices, highly to be regretted in the case. When some degree of order had been restored, Dick, with a few chosen men, set forth in advance. The darkness on shore, by contrast with the flashing of the surf, appeared before him like a solid body, and the howling and whistling of the gale drowned any lesser noise. He had scarce reached the end of the pier, however, when there fell a lull of the wind, and in this he seemed to hear on shore the hollow footing of horses and the clash of arms. Checking his immediate followers, he passed forward a step or two alone, even setting foot upon the down, and here he made sure he could detect the shape of men and horses moving. A strong discouragement assailed him. If their enemies were really on the watch, if they had beleaguered the shoreward end of the pier, he and Lord Foxham were taken in a posture of very poor defence, the sea behind. The men jostled in the dark upon the narrow causeway. He gave a cautious whistle, the signal previously agreed upon. It proved to be a signal for more than he desired. Instantly there fell through the black night a shower of arrows sent at a venture, and so close were the men huddled on the pier that more than one was hit, and the arrows were answered with cries of both fear and pain. In this first discharge Lord Foxham was struck down. Hawksley had him carried on board again at once, and his men, during the brief remainder of the skirmish, fought, when they fought at all, without guidance. That was, perhaps, the chief cause of the disaster which made haste to follow. At the shore end of the pier, for perhaps a minute, Dick held his own with a handful. One or two were wounded upon either side. Steel crossed steel. Nor had there been the least signal of advantage, when, in the twinkling of an eye, the tide turned against the party from the ship. Some one cried out that all was lost. The men were in very humour to lend an ear to a discomfortable counsel. The cry was taken up. "On board, lads, for your lives!" cried another. A third, with the true instinct of the coward, raised that inevitable report on all retreats: "We are betrayed!" And in a moment the whole mass of men went surging and jostling backward down the pier, turning their defenceless backs on their pursuers and piercing the night with craven outcry. One coward thrust off the ship's stern, while another still held her by the bows. The fugitives leaped, screaming, and were hauled on board, or fell back and perished in the sea. Some were cut down upon the pier by the pursuers. Many were injured on the ship's deck in the blind haste and terror of the moment, one man leaping upon another, and a third on both. At last, and whenever by design or accident, the bows of the Good Hope were liberated, and ever ready Lawless, who had maintained his place at the helm through all the hurly-burly by sheer strength of body and a liberal use of the cold steel, instantly clapped her on the proper tack. The ship began to move once more forward on the stormy sea, its scuppers running blood, its deck heaped with fallen men, sprawling and struggling in the dark. Thereupon Lawless sheathed his dagger, and turning to his next neighbour, "I have left my mark on them, gossip," said he. "The yelping coward hounds!" Now, while they were all leaping and struggling for their lives, the men had not appeared to observe the rough shoves and cutting stabs with which Lawless had held his post in the confusion. But perhaps they had already begun to understand somewhat more clearly, or perhaps another ear had overheard the helmsman's speech. Panic-stricken troops recover slowly, and men who have just disgraced themselves by cowardice, as if to wipe out the memory of their fault, will sometimes run straight into the opposite extreme of insubordination. So it was now, and the same men who had thrown away their weapons and been hauled feet foremost into the Good Hope began to cry out upon their leaders and demand that some one should be punished. This growing ill feeling turned upon Lawless. In order to get a proper offing, the old outlaw had put the head of the Good Hope to seaward. "What!" bawled one of the grumblers, "he carrieth us to seaward." "'Tis sooth," cried another. "Nay, we are betrayed for sure." And they all began to cry out in chorus that they were betrayed, and in shrill tones and with abominable oaths bade Lawless go about ship and bring them speedily ashore. Lawless, grinding his teeth, continued in silence to steer the true course, guiding the Good Hope among the formidable billows. To their empty terrors, as to their dishonourable threats, between drink and dignity, he scorned to make reply. The malcontents drew together a little abaft the mast, and it was plain they were like barnyard cocks, crowing for courage. Presently they would be fit for any extremity of injustice or ingratitude. Dick began to mount by the ladder, eager to interpose; but one of the outlaws, who was also something of a seaman, got beforehand. "Lads," he began, "ye are right wooden heads, I think. For to get back by the mast, we must have an offing, must we not? And this old Lawless—" Some one struck the speaker on the mouth, and the next moment, as a fire springs among dry straw, he was felled upon the deck, trampled under the feet, and dispatched by the daggers of his cowardly companions. At this, the wrath of Lawless rose and broke. "Steer yourselves!" he bellowed with a curse, and, careless of the result, he left the helm. The Good Hope was, at that moment, trembling on the summit of a swell. She subsided with sickening velocity upon the further side. A wave, like a great black bulwark, hove immediately in front of her, and with a staggering blow she plunged head foremost through that liquid hill. The green water passed right over her from stem to stern, as high as a man's knees. The sprays ran higher than the mast, and she rose again upon the other side with an appalling, tremulous indecision, like a beast that had been deadly wounded. 6 or 7 of the malcontents had been carried bodily overboard, and as for the remainder, when they found their tongues again, it was to bellow to the saints and wail upon Lawless to come back and take the tiller. Nor did Lawless wait to be twice bidden. The terrible result of his fling of just resentment sobered him completely. He knew better than anyone on board how nearly the Good Hope had gone bodily down below their feet, and he could tell by the laziness with which she met the sea that the peril was by no means over. Dick, who had been thrown down by the concussion and half drowned, rose, wading to his knees in the swamped well of the stern, and crept to the old helmsman's side. "Lawless," he said, "we do all depend on you. Ye are a brave, steady man, indeed, and crafty in the management of ships. I shall put 3 sure men to watch upon your safety." "Bootless, my master, bootless," said the steersman, peering forward through the dark. "We come every moment somewhat clearer of these sandbanks. With every moment, then, the sea packeth upon us heavier. And for all these whimperers, they will presently be on their backs. For, my master, 'tis a right mystery, but true, there never yet was a bad man that was a good shipman. None but the honest and the bold can endure me this tossing of a ship." "Nay, Lawless," said Dick, laughing, "that is a right shipman's byword, and hath no more of sense than the whistle of the wind. But, prithee, how go we? Do we lie well? Are we in good case?" "Master Shelton," replied Lawless, "I have been a Grey Friar. I praise fortune, an archer, a thief, and a shipman. Of all these coats, I had the best fancy to die in the Grey Friar's, as ye may readily conceive, and the least fancy to die in John Shipman's tarry jacket, and for that 2 excellent good reasons. First, that the death might take a man suddenly, and second, for the horror of that great salt smother and welter under my foot here." And Lawless stamped his foot. "Howbeit," he went on, "an I die not a sailor's death, and that this night I shall owe a tall candle to Our Lady." "Is it so?" asked Dick. "It is right so," replied the outlaw. "Do ye not feel how heavy and dull she moves upon the waves? Do ye not hear the water washing in her hold? She will scarce mind the rudder even now. Bide till she has settled a bit lower, and she will go down below your boots like a stone image, or drive ashore here under our lee, and come all to pieces like a twist of string." "Ye speak with a good courage," returned Dick. "Ye are not then appalled?" "Why, master," answered Lawless, "if ever a man had an ill crew to come to port with, it is I, a renegade friar, a thief, and all the rest on't. Well, ye may wonder, but I keep a good hope in my wallet; and if that I be to drown, I will drown with a bright eye, Master Shelton, and a steady hand." Dick returned no answer, but was surprised to find the old vagabond of so resolute a temper, and fearing some fresh violence or treachery, set forth upon his quest for 3 sure men. The great bulk of the men had now deserted the deck, which was continually wetted with the flying sprays, and where they lay exposed to the shrewdness of the winter wind. They had gathered instead into the hold of the merchandise, among the butts of wine, and lighted by 2 swinging lanterns. Here a few kept up the form of revelry, and toasted each other deep in Arblaster's Gascony wine. But as the Good Hope continued to tear through the smoking waves, and toss her stem and stern alternately high in the air and deep into white foam, the number of these jolly companions diminished with every moment and with every lurch. Many sat apart, tending their hurts, but the majority were already prostrated with sickness, and lay moaning in the bilge. Greensheve, Cuckow, and a young fellow of Lord Foxham's, whom Dick had already remarked for his intelligence and spirit, were still, however, both fit to understand and willing to obey. These Dick set as a bodyguard about the person of the steersman; and then, with a last look at the black sky and sea, he turned and went below into the cabin, whither Lord Foxham had been carried by his servants. End of Book 3, Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Black Arrow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 3, Chapter 6. The Good Hope. Continued. The moans of the wounded baron blended with the wailing of the ship's dog. The poor animal, whether he was merely sick at heart to be separated from his friends, or whether he indeed recognised some peril in the labouring of the ship, raised his cries, like minute guns, above the roar of wave and weather; and the more superstitious of the men heard, in these sounds, the knell of the Good Hope. Lord Foxham had been laid in a berth, upon a fur cloak. A little lamp burned dim before the Virgin in the bulkhead, and by its glimmer Dick could see the pale countenance and hollow eyes of the hurt man. "I am sore hurt," said he. "Come near to my side, young Shelton. Let there be one by me who at least is gentle born. For after having lived nobly and richly all the days of my life, this is a sad pass that I should get my hurt in a little ferreting skirmish, and die here, in a foul, cold ship upon the sea, among broken men and churls." "Nay, my lord," said Dick, "I rather pray to the saints that ye will recover you of your hurt, and come soon and sound ashore." "How?" demanded his lordship. "Come sound ashore? There is, then, a question of it?" "The ship laboureth, the sea is grievous and contrary," replied the lad. "And by what I can learn of my fellow that steereth us, we shall do well indeed if we come dry shod to land." "Ha!" said the baron gloomily. "Thus shall every terror attend upon the passage of my soul. Sir, pray rather to live hard, that ye may die easy, than to be fooled and fluted all through your life, as to the pipe and tabor, and in the last hour to be plunged among misfortunes. Howbeit, I have that upon my mind that must not be delayed. We have no priest aboard?" "None," replied Dick. "Here, then, to my secular interests," resumed Lord Foxham. "Ye must be as good a friend to me dead as I found you a gallant enemy when I was living. I fall in an evil hour for me, for England, and for them that trusted me. My men are being brought by Hamley, he that was your rival. They will rendezvous in the long room at Holywood. This ring from off my finger will accredit you to represent mine orders, and I shall write, besides, 2 words upon this paper, bidding Hamley yield to you the damsel. Will ye obey? I know not." "But, my lord, what orders?" inquired Dick. "Ay," quoth the baron, "ay, the orders." And he looked upon Dick with hesitation. "Are ye Lancaster or York?" he asked at length. "I shame to say it," answered Dick. "I can scarce clearly answer, but so much I think certain. Since I serve with Ellis Duckworth, I serve the house of York. Well, if that be so, I declare for York." "It is well," returned the other. "It is exceeding well. For truly, had ye said Lancaster, I wot not for the world what I had done. But sith ye are for York, follow me. I came hither but to watch these lords at Shoreby, while my excellent young lord, Richard of Gloucester, prepareth a sufficient force to fall upon and scatter them. I have made me notes of their strength, that watch they keep, and how they lie; and these I was to deliver to my young lord on Sunday, an hour before noon, at St. Bride's Cross, beside the forest. This tryst I am not likely to keep, but I pray you, of courtesy, to keep it in my stead. And see that not pleasure, nor pain, tempest, wound, nor pestilence withhold you from the hour and place, for the welfare of England lieth upon this cast." "I do soberly take this upon me," said Dick. "In so far as in me lieth, your purpose shall be done." "It is good," said the wounded man. "My lord Duke shall order your father, and if ye obey him with spirit and good will, then is your fortune made. Give me the lamp a little nearer to mine eyes, till that I write these words for you." He wrote a note, "To his worshipful kinsman, Sir John Hamley," and then a second, which he left without external superscription. "This is for the Duke," he said. "The word is England and Edward, and the counter England and York." "And Joanna, my lord?" asked Dick. "Nay, ye must get Joanna how ye can," replied the baron. "I have named you for my choice in both these letters, but ye must get her for yourself, boy. I have tried, as ye see here before you, and have lost my life. More could no man do." By this time the wounded man began to be very weary, and Dick, putting the precious papers in his bosom, bade him be of good cheer, and left him to repose. The day was beginning to break, cold and blue, with flying squalls of snow. Close under the lee of the Good Hope, the coast lay in alternate rocky headlands and sandy bays, and further inland the wooded hilltops of Tunstall showed along the sky. Both the wind and the sea had gone down, but the vessel wallowed deep and scarce rose upon the waves. Lawless was still fixed at the rudder, and by this time nearly all the men had crawled on deck, and were now gazing, with blank faces, upon the inhospitable coast. "Are we going ashore?" asked Dick. "Ay," said Lawless, "unless we get first to the bottom." And just then the ship rose so languidly to meet a sea, and the water weltered so loudly in her hold, that Dick involuntarily seized the steersman by the arm. "By the mass!" cried Dick, as the bows of the Good Hope reappeared above the foam. "I thought we had foundered, indeed. My heart was at my throat." In the waist, Greensheve, Hawksley, and the better men of both companies were busy breaking up the deck to build a raft, and to these Dick joined himself, working the harder to drown the memory of his predicament. But even as he worked, every sea that struck the poor ship, and every one of her dull lurches as she tumbled wallowing among the waves, recalled him with a horrid pang to the immediate proximity of death. Presently, looking up from his work, he saw that they were close in below a promontory, a piece of ruinous cliff, against the base of which the sea broke, white and heavy, almost overplumbed the deck, and above that again a house appeared, crowning a down. Inside the bay the seas ran gaily, raised the Good Hope upon her foam-flecked shoulders, carried her beyond the control of the steersman, and in a moment dropped her with a great concussion on the sand, and began to break over her, half-mast high, and roll her to and fro. Another great wave followed, raised her again, and carried her yet further in, and then a third succeeded, and left her far inshore of the more dangerous breakers, wedged upon a bank. "Now, boys," cried Lawless, "the saints have had a care of us indeed. The tide ebbs. Let us but sit down and drink a cup of wine, and before half an hour ye may all march me ashore as safe as on a bridge." A barrel was broached, and, sitting in what shelter they could find from the flying snow and spray, the shipwrecked company handed the cup around, and sought to warm their bodies and restore their spirits. Dick, meanwhile, returned to Lord Foxham, who lay in great perplexity and fear, the floor of his cabin washing knee-deep in water, and the lamp, which had been his only light, broken and extinguished by the violence of the blow. "My lord," said young Shelton, "fear not at all. The saints are plainly for us. The seas have cast us high upon a shoal, and as soon as the tide hath somewhat ebbed, we may walk ashore upon our feet." It was nearly an hour before the vessel was sufficiently deserted by the ebbing sea, and they could set forth for the land, which appeared dimly before them through a veil of driving snow. Upon a hillock on one side of their way, a party of men lay huddled together, suspiciously observing the movements of the new arrivals. "They might draw near and offer us some comfort," Dick remarked. "Well, an they come not to us, let us even turn aside to them," said Hawksley. "The sooner we come to a good fire and a dry bed, the better for my poor lord." But they had not moved far in the direction of the hillock before the men, with one consent, rose suddenly to their feet, and poured a flight of well directed arrows on the shipwrecked company. "Back, back!" cried his lordship. "Beware, in Heaven's name, that ye reply not." "Nay," cried Greensheve, pulling an arrow from his leather jack, "we are in no posture to fight, it is certain, being drenching wet, dog weary, and 3 parts frozen. But for the love of old England, what aileth them to shoot thus cruelly on their poor country people in distress?" "They take us to be French pirates," answered Lord Foxham. "In these most troublesome and degenerate days, we cannot keep our own shores of England; but our old enemies, whom we once chased on the sea and land, do now range at pleasure, robbing and slaughtering and burning. It is the pity and reproach of this poor land." The men upon the hillock lay closely observing them, while they trailed upward from the beach and wound inland among desolate sandhills. For a mile or so they even hung upon the rear of the march, ready at a sign to pour another volley on the weary and dispirited fugitives. And it was only when, striking at length upon a firm high road, Dick began to call his men to some more martial order, that these jealous guardians of the coast of England silently disappeared among the snow. They had done what they desired. They had protected their own homes and farms, their own families and cattle, and their private interest being thus secured, it mattered not the weight of a straw to any one of them, although the Frenchmen should carry blood and fire to every other parish in the realm of England. End of Book 3, Chapter 6. Disguise, Chapter 1 of The Black Arrow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Arrow by Robert Louis Stevenson. Book 4, Chapter 1 The Den. The place where Dick had struck the line of a high road was not far from Holywood, and within 9 or 10 miles of Shoreby on the Till. And here, after making sure that they were pursued no longer, the two bodies separated. Lord Foxham's followers departed, carrying their wounded master towards the comfort and security of the great abbey; and Dick, as he saw them wind away and disappear in the thick curtain of the falling snow, was left alone with near upon a dozen outlaws, the last remainder of his troop of volunteers. Some were wounded; one and all were furious at their ill success and long exposure; and though they were now too cold and hungry to do more, They grumbled and cast sullen looks upon their leaders. Dick emptied his purse among them, leaving himself nothing, thanked them for the courage they had displayed, though he could not have found it more readily in his heart to rate them for poltroonery, and having thus somewhat softened the effect of his prolonged misfortune, dispatched them to find their way, either severally or in pairs, to Shoreby and the Goat and Bagpipes. For his own part, influenced by what he had seen on board of the Good Hope, he chose Lawless to be his companion on the walk. The snow was falling, without pause or variation, in one even, blinding cloud. The wind had been strangled, and now blew no longer, and the whole world was blotted out and sheeted down below that silent inundation. There was great danger of wandering by the way and perishing in drifts, and Lawless, keeping half a step in front of his companion, and holding his head forward like a hunting dog upon the scent, inquired his way of every tree, and studied out their path, as though he were coning a ship among dangers. About a mile into the forest, they came to a place where several ways met, under a grove of lofty and contorted oaks. Even in the narrow horizon on the falling snow, it was a spot that could not fail to be recognised, and Lawless evidently recognised it with particular delight. "Now, Master Richard," said he, "an ye are not too proud to be the guest of a man who is neither a gentleman by birth nor so much as a good Christian, I can offer you a cup of wine and a good fire to melt the marrow in your frozen bones." "Lead on, Will," answered Dick. "A cup of wine and a good fire? Nay, I would go a fair way round to see them." Lawless turned aside under the bare branches of the grove, and, walking resolutely forward for some time, came to a steepish hollow or den, that had now drifted a quarter full of snow. On the verge of a great beech tree hung precariously rooted, and here the old outlaw, pulling aside some brushy underwood, bodily disappeared into the earth. The beech had, in some violent gale, been half uprooted, and had torn up a considerable stretch of turf, and it was under this that Lawless had dug out his forest hiding place. The roots served him for rafters, the turf was his thatch; for walls and floor he had his mother, the earth. Rude as it was, the hearth in one corner blackened by fire, and the presence in another of a large oaken chest, well fortified with iron, showed it at one glance to be the den of a man, and not the burrow of a digging beast. Though the snow had drifted at the mouth and sifted in upon the floor of this earth cavern, yet was the air much warmer than without. And when Lawless had struck a spark, and the dry furze bushes had begun to blaze and crackle on the hearth, the place assumed, even to the eye, an air of comfort and of home. With a sigh of great contentment, Lawless spread his broad hands before the fire, and seemed to breathe the smoke. "Here, then," he said, "is this old Lawless rabbit hole. Pray Heaven there come no terrier. Far have I rolled hither and thither, and here and about, since that I was 14 years of mine age, and first ran away from mine abbey, with the sacrist's gold chain and a mass book, that I sold for 4 marks. I have been in England and France and Burgundy, and in Spain too, on a pilgrimage for my poor soul, and upon the sea, which is no man's country. But here is my place, Master Shelton. This is my native land, this burrow in the earth. Come rain or wind, whether it's April, and the birds all sing, and the blossoms fall about my bed, or whether it's winter, and I sit alone with my good gossip, the fire, and Robin Redbreast twitters in the woods, here is my church and market, my wife and child. It is here I come back to, and it is here, so please the saints, that I would like to die." "'Tis a warm corner, to be sure," replied Dick, "and a pleasant, and a well hid." "It had need to be," returned Lawless. "For an they found it, Master Shelton, it would break my heart. But here," he added, burrowing his stout fingers in the sandy floor, "here is my wine cellar, and ye shall have a flask of excellent strong stingo." Sure enough, but after a little digging, he produced a big leathern bottle of about a gallon, nearly 3 parts full of a very heady and sweet wine; and when they had drunk to each other comradely, and the fire had been replenished and blazed up again, the pair lay at full length, thawing and steaming, and divinely warm. "Master Shelton," observed the outlaw, Ye have had two mischances this last while, and ye are like to lose the maid. Do I take it aright?" "Aright," returned Dick, nodding his head. "Well, now," continued Lawless, "hear an old fool that hath been nigh hand everything, and seen nigh hand all. Ye go too much on other people's errands, Master Dick. Ye go on Ellis's, but he desireth rather the death of Sir Daniel. Ye go on Lord Foxham's; well, the saints preserve him! Doubtless he meaneth well; but go ye upon your own, good Dick. Come right to the maid's side. Court her, lest she forget you. Be ready, and when the chance shall come, off with her at the saddle bow." "Ay, but, Lawless, beyond doubt she is now in Sir Daniel's own mansion," answered Dick. "Thither, then, go we," replied the outlaw. Dick stared at him. "Nay, I mean it," nodded Lawless. "And if ye are of so little faith, and stumble at a word, see here." And the outlaw, taking a key from about his neck, opened the oak chest, and dipping and groping deep among its contents, produced first a friar's robe, and next a girdle of rope, and then a huge rosary of wood, heavy enough to be counted as a weapon. "Here," he said, "is for you. On with them." And then, when Dick had clothed himself in this clerical disguise, Lawless produced some colours and a pencil, and proceeded with greatest cunning to disguise his face. The eyebrows he thickened and produced. To the moustache, which was yet hardly visible, he rendered a like service; while by a few lines around his eye he changed the expression and increased the apparent age of this young monk. "Now," he resumed, "when I have done the like, we shall make as bonny a pair of friar as the eye could wish. Boldly to Sir Daniel's we shall go, and there be hospitably welcome for the love of Mother Church." "And how, dear Lawless," cried the lad, "shall I repay you?" "Tut, brother," replied the outlaw, "I do naught but for my pleasure. Mind not for me. I am one, by the mass, that mindeth for himself. When that I lack, I have a long tongue and a voice like the monastery bell. I do ask, my son, and where asking faileth, I do most usually take." The old rogue made a humorous grimace; and although Dick was displeased to lie under so great favours to so equivocal a personage, he was yet unable to restrain his mirth. With that, Lawless returned to the big chest, and was soon similarly disguised. But below his gown Dick wondered to observe him conceal a sheaf of black arrows. "Wherefore do ye that?" asked the lad. "Wherefore arrows, when you take no bow?" "Nay," replied Lawless, lightly, "'tis like there will be heads broke, not to say backs, ere you and I win sound from where we are going to; and if any fail, I would our fellowship would come by the credit on't. A black arrow, Master Dick, is the seal of our abbey; it showeth you who writ the bill." "And ye prepare so carefully," said Dick. "I have here some papers that, for mine own sake, and the interest of those that trusted me, were better left behind than found upon my body. Where shall I conceal them, Will?" "Nay," replied Lawless, "I will go forth into the wood, and whistle me 3 verses of a song. Meanwhile, do you bury them where ye please, and smooth the sand upon the place." "Never!" cried Richard. "I trust you, man. I were base indeed if I not trusted you." "Brother, ye are but a child," replied the old outlaw, passing and turning his face upon Dick from the threshold of the den. "I am a kind old Christian, and no traitor to men's blood, and no sparer of mine own in a friend's jeopardy. But, fool child, I am a thief by trade and birth and habit. If my bottle were empty and my mouth dry, I would rob you, dear child, as sure as I love, honour, and admire your parts and person. Can it be clearer spoken? No." And he stumped forth through the bushes with a snap of his big fingers. Dick, thus left alone, after a wondering thought upon the inconsistencies of his companion's character, hastily produced, reviewed, and buried his papers. One only he reserved to carry along with him, since it in no ways compromised his friends, and yet might serve him in a pinch against Sir Daniel. That was the knight's own letter to Lord Wensleydale, sent by Throgmorton on the morrow of the defeat at Risingham, and found next day by Dick upon the body of the messenger. Then, treading down the embers of the fire, Dick left the den, and rejoined the old outlaw, who stood awaiting him under the leafless oaks, and was already beginning to be powdered by the falling snow. Each looked upon the other, and each laughed, so thorough and so droll was the disguise. "Yet I would it were but summer and a clear day," grumbled the outlaw, "that I might see myself in the mirror of a pool. There may be many of Sir Daniel's men that know me, and if we fell to be recognised, there might be two words for you, my brother. But as for me, in a paternostern while, I should be kicking in a rope's end." Thus they set forth together along the road to Shoreby, which, in this part of its course, kept near the margin of a forest, coming forth from time to time in the open country, and passing beside poor folks' houses and small farms. Presently, at the sight of one of these, Lawless pulled up. "Brother Martin," he said, in a voice capitally disguised, and suited to his monkish robe, "let us enter and seek alms from these poor sinners. Pax vobiscum. Ay," he added in his own voice, "'tis as I feared. I have somewhat lost the whine of it; and, by your leave, good Master Shelton, ye must suffer me to practise in these country places, before that I risk my fat neck by entering Sir Daniel's. But look ye a little, what an excellent thing it is to be a jack of all trades. An I had not been a shipman, ye had infallibly gone down in the Good Hope. An I had not been a thief, I could not have painted me your face. And but that I had been a grey friar, and sung loud in the choir, and ate hearty at the board, I could not have carried this disguise, but the very dogs would have spied us out and barked at us for shams." He was by this time close to the window of the farm, and he rose on his tiptoes and peeped in. "Nay," he cried, "better and better. We shall here try our false faces with a vengeance, and have a merry jest on Brother Capper to boot." And so saying, he opened the door and led the way into the house. Three of their own company sat at the table, greedily eating, their daggers stuck beside them in the board, and the black and menacing looks which they continued to shower upon the people of the house proved that they owed their entertainment rather to force than favour. On the two monks, who now, with a sort of humble dignity, entered the kitchen of the farm, they seemed to turn with a particular resentment; and one, it was John Capper in person, who seemed to play the leading part, instantly and rudely ordered them away. "We want no beggars here," he cried. But another, although he was far from recognising Dick and Lawless, inclined to more moderate counsels. "Not so," he cried. "We be strong men, and take; these be weak, and crave. But in the latter end, these shall be uppermost, and we below. Mind him not, my father, but come, drink of my cup, and give me a benediction." "Ye are men of a light mind, carnal and accursed," said the monk. "Now, may the saints forbid that I ever should drink with such companions! But here, for the pity I bear to sinners, here I do leave you a blessed relic, the which, for your soul's interest, I bid you kiss and cherish." So far, Lawless thundered upon them like a preaching friar; but with these words he drew from under his robe a black arrow, tossed it on the board in front of the three startled outlaws, turned in the same instant, and, taking Dick along with him, was out of the room and out of sight among the falling snow before they had time to utter a word or move a finger. "So," he said, "we have proved our false faces, Master Shelton. I will now adventure my poor carcase where ye please." "Good," returned Richard. "It irks me to be doing. Set we on for Shoreby." End of Book 4, Chapter 1.